We are moving to our next panel, exit strategies for service companies. And I would like to invite to the stage Puneet Shivan, who is going to be the moderator for this panel, Srinivas Rao, CEO of Aujas, Singh Mekar, and Ashish Mahadwar.
The mics are off. Mics are off.
Oh, I'll speak a little louder. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, so thank you guys for attending the session on exit strategies for next-gen technology companies. We have a very insightful and impressive panel to address the issues which I think many of the folks who are entrepreneurs here, there are a few words which excite them more than IPO and exit. I sold my company has a ring to it, which I'm sure many of us entrepreneurs look forward to. But I saw a very interesting comment on Olympics, and I thought that's very relevant to when we think of exits. And what it was commenting on the 100-meter dash, which, as you know, is completed in now less than 10 seconds. And the statement said that it takes hours and years to prepare to do it in seconds. Same thing is true with the exits, actually, that exits take lot more effort than just planning for the transaction and hiring an investment banker like me to do it. It is a much longer process, and that's what we will like to get the insights from the August panel that we have. I'm Puneet Shivam. I head up the US practice as well as co-head the technology practice for a bank called Avendus Capital, where we help mid-sized companies in raising capital and exit. So I've seen the story play out, although as a reflected right rather than myself being in the driver's seat of the struggles and challenges and the joys that an entrepreneur goes through. So today with us we have three very relevant and very appropriate panelists who can throw more light into the issue and hopefully to the entrepreneurs as well as to the acquirers in the audience shape how they think about the event of exit in the context of overall both next-gen services as building the organization. So we have, starting from my side, we have Ashish Mahadwar, who is a senior vice president with Cognizant. I'm sure you all are very familiar with the organization, which has done excellent growth over the last 10, 12 years. He heads the strategic alliances across all technologies for Cognizant. So in that sense, he's very much in the loop and in the driver's seat to manage the ecosystem, which is very vast for a company like Cognizant, both with new technologies and older technologies. Prior to that, he also headed the enterprise application division, which he doubled in revenue from 800 million to about 1.5 billion. And in this role, and in this prior role, he has evaluated numerous companies as Cognizant, as you can imagine, must be approached for, and has a very good insight into both what a company like Cognizant likes and what they don't like when they look for a target company. Next to him is MS Rao, who is co-founder and CEO of a very interesting company, Aujas. If look it up if you don't not familiar with the company. It's very relevant to today's world. It's about global information risk management services, and they have pretty marquee investors in there. And before this, Rao was also with Cisco, and prior to that, he has already gone through one exit. So Network Solutions, many of you may be aware of that company, which was acquired by IBM Global Services. One of the architects of that company and that exit was Rao. So I'll invite him to especially comment from the perspective of a company builder. And to my extreme left is Satyajit Singh Mekar. He has probably played all sides of the role. So he was a founder of a company long back, an analytics company. Then he has worked with almost all major software companies, Oracle, SAP, and now he's part of KPMG's strategic alliances across all services group, as well as part of the investment committee for KPMG, in which they look at making strategic investments. So again, a very relevant profile. So with this, let me just start off with Rao, with you, if I may. Taking mostly a builder or an entrepreneur perspective, that in today's world, as you know, as we heard about Internet of Things, cloud, analytics, the world is changing pretty fast. And in that context, how do you look to build your company, given that you have investors, maybe with at least a long shot view of, at some point there will be a question of IPO or exit. So how do you put pieces together, and how do you think about building your company in that direction?
Sure. Thanks, Puneet. So obviously, right, when you start something, right, at the end of the day, the first and actually in many ways the last thing which you want to do, which you want to be staying very focused on, is how do you create value, right? It's about creating value for customers. It's about creating value for all the other stakeholders in the process, your employees, your investors. So fundamentally, the first focus when you start has to be on value creation, right? And the value creation, and when people talk about an exit, fundamentally, when you start something, I guess all of us need to have some clarity and some visibility on what our end goal is and how do we get there. Think about it as anything else which you do, right? So for example, if you're building a product, you have a product life cycle and all of that, right? So even for an exit, it's not something which is going to happen suddenly overnight, right? So there is a process, there's an approach which you have to take. And to put together and create value, there are a set of what I would call fundamental building blocks which you need to be aware of, right? So for example, let's say, for example, the company I run is a services company, right? We are also building some platforms as we go along in the risk management space. So obviously over a period of time, we believe, right, the money which has gone into the company, right, end of the day has to get multiplied several times over to get meaningful outcomes for all people involved in the process, right? Now, how do you do that, right? So obviously, and I'll give you my version of the balanced scorecard, right? I like to use that framework for how do you build value in getting to an exit. So obviously, it's about obviously the basic financials. How do you deliver a set of metrics from a financial standpoint? Are the metrics trending positively upwards? How do you generate free cash flow, etc.? How do you generate growth from a revenue standpoint and so on? Parallelly, from a customer standpoint, right? If you're looking at how do you create value which could potentially lead to an exit, right? It's about the type of customers you get, the kind of logos you have, the ticket sizes of the business which you do, right? Is whatever you're doing repeatable, right? If it requires that you need, a genius and Einstein to come in and do every engagement with a customer, that model is not going to scale, right? So you have to figure out a way to ensure that whatever you do can be repeated, is a repeatable model. At the same time, it shouldn't be so dumbed down that somebody else can do what you are doing in a fairly, can replicate that model, right? So it's a challenge between balancing how you can create whatever you do. Can you put together a playbook which can be recreated? How do you build, for example, from a sales perspective, is the process of building your, let's say, your pipeline, et cetera, is that something which is easy to replicate and so on? So essentially look at it from a customer perspective, which is about how many large engagements can you get, how quickly can you scale, what is the cost of acquiring a customer, how difficult or how easy is it to penetrate and then permeate, and so on, right? I've talked about the financial part. The third part is how do you innovate, right? So obviously if it's just going to be arbitrage, right, at some point that model will start to fall on it's not going to work out. So essentially it's about thinking about how do you innovate, how do you create frameworks which allow for repeatability, which allow for creating, for example, there was in the session just before this, I think the Symphony discussion was on a connected car and how they're building a framework. So you have to do things like that, right? You have to create, so one is obviously the brand equity which you build, which is an intangible asset. It's about creating digital assets, about frameworks, about copyrights, about patents, etc. Right? So these are some of the things. And last but not the least, right? And actually in many ways the most important is about the people which you build as part of your team, right? If tomorrow, let's say, if hypothetically, if you start a company and you were to stop a truck, right? Then if that company is going to go bust, then obviously you're creating significant barriers for an exit event, right? So it's about how do you put together a team, right? A high performance, a team with a culture of delivering high performance, right? And these are three of the four things which one has to keep looking at, and it's not something which you do, one fine day. It's something which you have to start doing from the time you start building the company, so that at some point, when you think about an exit, either through a public offering or through a buyout, these elements are in place.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob. In fact, let me now shift to you, Ashish, because sitting on the other side, where you are probably evaluating hundreds of companies a year, and one question as bankers we always get that what would an Accenture like, or what will a Cognizant like? And there is kind of this, it's probably from an exit perspective, their market. So they want to, so when you evaluate companies, especially in the context of how the world has moved, right? So there was a quest for offshore, quest for scale, now there is a quest for newer technologies. So in the current environment, how do you guys look at companies when you're considering them for a possible acquisition?
Sure, thanks. So I think Srini mentioned quite a few of those factors, right? So when we look at our business, we essentially look at it from two dimensions, right? So it's the first is from a strategy perspective in terms of we've already, this is public knowledge. We have our H1, H2, H3 strategy, which is H1 is, large scale businesses that we have, both from a geography and capability perspective, where we're really focused on helping our clients run better, right, in terms of operating efficiency. And then H2 is where businesses where we're looking to scale, which is management consulting, infrastructure services, and vertical BPO. And H3 is where emerging business like SMAC and so on and so forth, where we're looking to help our customers run different, right, in terms of innovate in their business. So that's one of the dimensions. The other dimension is the three vectors of our business, which is geography, industries, or verticals, and capabilities. Mm-hmm. So whenever we look at any, and against these two dimensions, each of our business units has strategic growth objectives, right, which are aligned to their industries or businesses. So like in healthcare, it'll be connected health, or in banking, it'll be the digital bank of tomorrow. So when we look at, in the last 3 years, I've probably looked at about 40 or 50 transactions in terms of opportunities. And when we look at any of these opportunities, we look at them in the context of these dimensions in terms of the vectors of our business and the strategy and the strategic objectives for growth. And we look for alignment associated with those vectors. And then that's the first step, right? And that's the first probably criteria. And then once you get past that criteria, then you start getting into some of the details that Srini talked about in terms of the team, the financials, the customers. The one thing we'll never do is acquire for scale, right? Because we have enough scale as an organization. And acquiring for scale means you're acquiring just for the people, and people is a resource that's hard to completely depend a business strategy upon. So we look for IP. What kind of, we just announced a couple of weeks back acquisition of a company in Atlanta, ITAS, right? And that is an interesting example because this company is entirely focused on service provider network, has very strong relationships with service providers, and has built deep expertise in video and audio processing across multiple devices, anywhere, anytime kind of situation for service providers. Now, what we acquired them for was their capability, which we believe we can extend to other industries in terms of healthcare and financial services and so on and so forth, which they won't have access to. So it kind of fits beautifully into our strategic objectives, and they have capabilities which we can then transport and leverage into other industries.
Very interesting, interesting. In fact, and I'll come back to Ashish on a follow-on question, but let me first go to Satyajit. So there is, both the panelists, Ashish and Srini, spoke about kind of the big picture, but there is a real life just before a transaction and just after the transaction. Satyajit, can you throw some light into how can a company be more ready to become part of generally a larger organization, and what happens immediately after that for an acquisition to be successful? Because the statistics are strongly against M&A, right? 40% of M&A fails. So can you throw some light on that?
Yeah, I can. And actually, just to put it in perspective, KPMG in the US has done approximately 10 to 12 acquisitions in the last two and a half years. And you could probably more than double that number for the rest of the world. So that pace is pretty decent for the type of growth we're trying to drive above and beyond the organic capability. And we might be doing something right, because the last I looked, I think over 80% of our acquisitions have been successful. And we're still learning. But to answer your question, I think in the kind of business we're in, and there's a subtle difference, but important one from, let's say, Cognizant, we are still in a very highly regulated industry because of our Big Four, Big Five background, which means we cannot serve a certain set of clients where we might be their auditors, et cetera. So that's very unique to our business. So what we really do very early in the process, when we've decided on a target that we want to go after, is to really get a very clear handle on the book of business and the customers they serve, and what the nature of those contracts are going to be, because that's going to materially impact the valuation of the company we're looking at in that situation as we start to finalize, what the pieces look like. Secondly, we look very heavily for synergies, and I can almost say with a high degree of certainty that more often than not, we are never looking at an acquisition just for the organic size and shape of that company, but what does it do to provide synergies with some of our core business? We just picked up a mobility company out of Dallas and an analytics company out of Atlanta, so we were talking the same patch, Ashish. And in both those cases, it was not just about the great work they've been doing in those two separate areas, but how does, for example, the mobile company that we picked up fundamentally accelerate our ability to drive a finance transformation at a bank or a operational transformation at a industrial markets company. So we really need to look at the synergy element of it as an integral part of how we're going to integrate that company as it comes on board. Third element is the people. We are organized by what we call service networks, which is loosely speaking like practices. Geography for us is largely irrelevant right now. Industry and solution are the two major dimensions, solution being the capability area. So we really have to pay a lot of attention to how are we going to integrate the, let's say it's 100 people, how they're going to fit into our service networks and our various service lines and our industry dimensions. And then lastly, the integration around what we call market development, which is the combination of sales and business development is the way we describe that area. We serve probably around 2,000 customers in the US, and we have very high impact teams with lots of cross-functional portfolios. So how are we going to be able to take this new capability that we brought in and really educate our frontline so that we're not just stuck with, some great capability and some customers that we bought, but no clear path of how this is going to drive pipeline development inside our customer base. So those are some of the examples we really pay attention to, above and beyond some of the stuff we've vetted already earlier, like the culture fit and all that stuff, specifically when it comes down to the integration process.
Sure. And again, I'll have a follow-up question on that, but let me go back, Srini, to one very important question that we often get asked. When to exit, right? I mean, what is the time where you start considering an exit? So how do you sit in a boardroom full of investors and kind of entrepreneurs like you, and how do you tackle that question? What goes into it? And a related question is that for probably some of the entrepreneurs in the audience is, how should they think about exit? I mean, too early is probably distracting, and too late is probably too late, right? So
Sure.
how do you?
That's a question on which I think we can have a very, very long answer. Right. So I'll try and keep it short. Right. I think it's about a lot of things, right? So obviously one is obviously in terms of growth, and obviously I guess there are a bunch of entrepreneurs, and part of the question is also related to the mindset, right? There are a bunch of people who are happy being able to scale, to start from zero and take certain things to some level, right? And then they feel, we need to move on to something else, right? So that's one very important element, which tends to get sometimes, it doesn't reflect in a balance sheet, right?
Balance sheet, yes.
But it's about a mindset, right? So it's something which you've done. You have this growth instinct. You are able to take a company from zero to a certain number, and then you feel, maybe it's time for me to do something else, right? So that's one, right? So that, I think, in many ways is actually a very, very important element, which doesn't get emphasized adequately. Right?
Completely agree.
A lot of focus tends to be on the growth and a lot of the financial metrics, but this doesn't get
Very
adequately factored. So that's one element. Second, of course, then you go back to slightly more mundane things, which is numbers, right? So for example, let's say if you're a VC invested company like we are, at some point the investors would want some level of monetization, right? And a certain level of expectation of return. And based on where your business is going, right? So that's a call which between you and the board or the investors you agree on, right? So it could be, an exit could be in multiple forms. So I think it's really a question of, I don't think there is obviously all of us would like to be in the WhatsApp situation, right? But I think that happens, that's a black swan event. It happens once in a lifetime. So for people who run slightly more conventional businesses as opposed to WhatsApp, I think you have to
As
work
opposed to
through
playing
this.
poker in Vegas.
Yeah, right. It's a question of working through it and then balancing some of these considerations. It's also sometimes, a lot of times, it's about scale, right? You've built the organization up to a certain scale, and do you think intrinsically by yourself, right? Can you take it to the next level? It's also about the aspiration of a lot of people who work with you, right? In some cases, they want to now work for, let's say, a bigger company, or they want to see some liquidity for all the hard work they've done. So you have to balance all this. There's no, I don't think you can put this into a mathematical model.
Formula, but
If I were to just add, right, to one thing to what Srini said, I think one of the ways to look at it is the best time to exit is when you don't need to exit, because by the time you need to exit, you already, and no matter how you try and package it and hide it, people will find out, right? Because on the side, you have people who keep looking at multiple transactions, and it doesn't take too long to figure out if there are issues in the business, right, that's causing you to
Want to exit.
want to exit, right? So.
yeah, no, that's very
I think
astute.
there's one other element that is very unique to services companies, because that was, one of the unique focus areas of our panel. And if you think about from an entrepreneur's perspective, after having been in those shoes earlier in my life, it's relatively easier to start a services company than a product company, just because of the nature of the lack of upfront investment required. You can start to get some contracts going, pay as you go, all that stuff. In today's market, when I see some of the companies, the smarter CEOs are really looking at the market having shifted enough that, unless you plan to stay in the SMB space forever or in the early adopter space forever, the more and more a technology or an area gets mainstream, the larger and more complex companies adopt it, you reach an inflection point and you have to make a very tough decision. Do I seriously go for growth capital, or do I really think that my future is, better off working inside a bigger organization that has the brand equity to go and really have the conversation with the CFOs and the CIOs to buy the big ticket item that I couldn't sell myself?
Yeah, that's very,
It's
that's
very,
very,
very
very,
important
very
in some
critical
of
point,
them, so.
especially in some of the next-gen services, as we are calling them. You have to realize when you cannot fulfill the market requirement without their significant capital, significant reach or brand. So that's a very important point. In fact, you mentioned, Ashish, you walked into a valuation thing. So let me also follow up on that. And one question that we get asked and sometimes are demanded to serve our sell-side clients on is that for X company, why buyer paid so much? Why did they pay so much? And in Cognizant, that question comes in. You may not be part of that deal. Is Market RX? That, Cognizant paid so much
Justice,
on
yeah.
Justice Aero. Hi,
Somewhere.
Justice. So basically, the point being that what makes a company WhatsApp, which was a maybe not the right question for you, but a Market RX. So what makes a company so much more valuable than the traditional 7 times, 8 times EBITDA?
I think it depends upon timing, right? In some of these situations, timing is everything. If you look at that particular deal, and I don't go into specifics of it, but it's really it came at a time when we were really trying to expand our vertical BPO business significantly, right? And that was a great opportunity because they had built tremendous capability in vertical BPO, specifically in sales and marketing for pharmaceuticals. And it was also a time when we saw significant opportunities, similar opportunities in other industries, in insurance, in financial services, so on and so forth, right? So we felt again that the transportability of that capability was significant, where we can, from a shareholder return perspective, it wasn't just about taking what they had and just growing in their space, but really taking that capability and applying it to other parts of our business, right? So whenever we see an opportunity where we see that transportability, obviously we therefore are willing to extend the valuation. End of the day, it's all about looking at it from the lens of the shareholders and how we can make sure that we provide them the highest returns. So if it's something is extremely specific and doesn't have a tremendous amount of expandable, like we acquired a SAP retail firm a few years ago. That was very, very narrow and specific to SAP and retail, and the growth of that business would be dependent on how SAP grows in retail as well. And you could expand it to go from large enterprise to mid-sized enterprises, so on and so forth, but there's limited applicability, as opposed to the ITAS example, the Market RX example, or some of the others where there is, because there was a significant amount of productized services, so to speak, as well as intellectual property that we could leverage.
Sure.
elsewhere.
In fact, Satyajit, let me come back to one. You had made this point earlier, which Ashish just confirmed, that you look at the companies as a total after they become part of you, not just, which is what Ashish mentioned. But let me go to the integration aspect. One issue we face, at least people express concern, if a smaller company, which is typically kind of a lot of the companies that may be in the audience, look to get acquired by a larger company, whether KPMG or Cognizant, they have this issue of like, how would our people fit in? How would the culture fit in? Strong processes, bureaucracy, all the stuff that comes with it. So how have you dealt with, addressed, or faced those issues?
We could spend a whole day talking about it, but in just a few minutes, I would just probably put two aspects in front of the audience. Depending on the type of company and the type of customers they serve and the sales motion of how they serve those customers, you have to determine the degree of tightness or looseness in which it needs to adjust to the acquiring company structures. In our case, which practice, which industry, et cetera, is going to fit in. So back to the example of the mobility company that we recently acquired, the nature of the beast and the kind of conversations and the type of people they were talking to required a certain degree of freedom, which is not the same as some of the examples that Ashish mentioned in the more quote-unquote traditional areas. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out the operating metrics and the operating model that this acquisition is going to land into way before it lands into it, because we have to really think through what does that mean in terms of our definition of success in terms of utilization, profitability, and 20 other things, and where the people are going to be measured in terms of their performance compared to where they were measured. So in that dimension, we have to be able to look at and say that for a period of time, we have to, as a part of the business case, define the operating model to be much more of a slow roll adjustment versus I'm acquiring somebody who is in information protection and risk management, and I already have a very healthy IPBR practice that they're going to really just largely add to, and the domain and the context of the people that come with it are very used to being able to sell and deliver in a particular way. So those are the kind of dimensions that we look at amongst 2-3 others that, for the sake of brevity, I won't get into, that really tries to get to that. But we're still learning. I mean, there's
because
a
that's
lot
one
work
of
to be
the
done.
key challenges that we see post-acquisition people run into, and sometimes are apprehensive even before acquisition on
Yes.
both sides.
Yes.
Srini, going back to one and probably last set of questions to all of you is that in the current environment, the technology services stack has changed significantly, right? It has become much more IP-centric. It has become much more new technologies. So how have you seen, because you have seen pretty long history of technology services from a NetSolution days to now. Are you seeing any change in the way the whole companies need to be built and the pace of exit, how soon you need to get to a size to exit? Is there any change in that?
Sure, obviously, I think there's a whole change, right? I think one of my pet grouses in life is people talk about smack, right? People should be actually talking about scams. Right? Because security is a very important element of which gets missed out, right? Everything which you do in social, cloud, analytics, mobile has a significant security component which doesn't get adequately emphasized. That being aside, I think the whole thing is this whole arbitrage model I think is gone, right? It's all about the issues we spoke about: IP, digital assets, frameworks which allow for non-linearity, right? The kind of customers you acquire and all of that. So to that extent, I think the old model is gone, right? And as he said, it's no longer about companies buying for scale, right? It's in a lot of times it's about companies buying for scope, doing something which for them to do, build versus buy, right? Becomes a very critical issue.
Okay.
And just to add, right, as everybody is trying to move to everything as a service, right, that creates new opportunities for services companies or even startups as well, who are trying to look at a convergence between products and services. So, I mean, we've been talking a lot about IP, but there's also an opportunity to take existing IP, like a Salesforce platform or a Force.com platform, and build capability on top of it that makes you, or could make you extremely valuable.
Very interesting. So my last kind of question to each of you is that any kind of brief tip for entrepreneurs who are building their organizations or trying to build their organizations on how to create value for themselves, their investors, their employees. So Ashish, starting with you, anything that you would like
Yeah,
to
I
leave
think you
as a
just have.
parting?
I think most important thing is to have a specific focus, right? Because service, like you said, most services companies are undercapitalized when you compare with product companies, and everybody tries to grow the business using their working capital. But beyond a point, you really can't build a valuable company without having the capital necessary for creating these solutions, creating frameworks or IP or whatever, right? So that's one thing which most service company entrepreneurs tend to underestimate and therefore prevent themselves from really. And the second part is having a clear sense of differentiation. Differentiation could be based on industry, could be based on capability, could be based on geography, or any combination of those. But having that clarity, in services you can easily get pulled into different directions, right? You could be doing big data one day, and then somebody needs SAP and whatever else, right? You could pretty much it's a resource model, so you can pull resources from anywhere. So developing that focus over a period of time and narrowing your aperture is what will make you more valuable from a longer term perspective, both to your customers as well as to potentially when you're looking at exits.
So differentiation, focus, and appropriately capitalized.
Yeah.
Very good.
I think as long as you focus on building a great company, the outcome will get taken care of.
Right. And let me add to these two gentlemen what they said, not repeat what they said, but I'd say really embrace your customers. We're going to look at not just the amount of the revenue you bring to the table as a part of an acquisition discussion, but the quality of that revenue, which is going to be a big determinant in how we value the company, that it will end up creating in turn sustainable value for us.
Okay, so with that, we'll end the discussion. But thank you again, Ashish, Srini, Satyajit. I think that was a very insightful and very kind of practitioner's view of this whole elusive exit. So thank you again, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.